The 13th session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. May I request our colleagues to stand for a minute of silent prayer. Thank you. The Secretary will now call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile, Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Onasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Usmeña, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Trilon.
There are 16 senators are present. The Chair declares the presence of the quorum. Majority Leader.
Magandang hapon po, Mr. President, sa ating pong colleagues. Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journal of the 12th session, August 26, 2014, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the journal of session number 12, Tuesday, August 26, 2014, is dispensed with and the same hereby approved.
Sir President, may we welcome to the Senate students of the Columban College from Olongapo, headed by Ms. Desiree Anonat and Mr. Zostenes Alikdan. May I ask them to stand to be recognized?
The students from Columban College, Olongapo City, headed by Mrs. Anonat, the chair of the Social Work Department, is recognized for the record, and we welcome them to the Senate.
Sir President, we also have 18 barangay captains from Ubay, Bohol, led by ABC President Violi Reyes. So let's welcome and wish them isang maayong hapon.
The Liga ng mga Barangay from the municipality of Ubay, Bohol, headed by the ABC President Violeta Reyes, you're welcome to the Senate. The presence of our visitors is made of record.
We also have, last Mr. President, mga kababayan and org mates ng ating dating National President ng JCI na si Senator J.V. Ejercito. Nandito po si JCI San Juan Pinaglabanan, led by its President Mike Tanto, and by JCI Sol Wam Day Moon. I hope you said it right. May I ask them to rise to be recognized and to be welcomed to the Senate.
The Junior Chamber of the JCI of San Juan, led by President Mike Tanto. The presence is made of record, and welcome to the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
The Secretary will read the reference of business.
Bills on first reading. Senate number 2372, entitled An Act Providing for a 20% increase in the basic salary of government officials and employees and for other purposes, by Senator Recto.
Civil Service, Government Organization, Finance.
Senate number 2373, an act amending Section 709 of Presidential Decree 1464, otherwise known as the Tariff and Customs Code of the Philippines, as amended by Senator Paulo Benigno Bam-Aquino IV.
Ways and Means.
Senate number 2374, an act providing for the mandatory domestic processing of all mineral ores, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7942, otherwise known as the Philippine Mining Act of 1995, and for other purposes, by Senator Paulo Benigno Bam-Aquino IV.
Environment and Natural Resources.
Resolutions. PS Resolution number 863, directing the proper Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the operation and maintenance of Philippine National Railways to ensure the safety of its passengers, by Senator Lapid.
Public Services.
PS Resolution number 864, directing the Committee on Education, Arts and Culture and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the policies and guidelines being implemented by the Commission on Higher Education and the Department of Education anent educational tours and field trips in light of the recent tragedy involving the drowning of 9 students from Bulacan State University by Senator Lapid.
Education, Arts and Culture.
PS Resolution number 865 urging the Department of Health, University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital, UPPGH, and other state academic institutions and hospitals to create a study group on amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the brain and the spinal cord, leading to paralysis, to determine the extent of its affliction and the number of affected Filipinos, with the intention of providing support mechanisms and assistance to patients and raising awareness about the rare disease by Senator Grace Poe.
Health and Demography.
PS Resolution number 866 urging the Senate Committees on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food, and Public Services to look into the El Nino phenomenon, to put in place measures to mitigate the impacts of a prolonged dry spell, avert a looming water crisis, and protect the Philippine agricultural sector by Senator Grace Poe.
Committees on Climate Change and Agriculture and Food.
PS Resolution number 867 directing the proper Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported possible water crisis in Manila by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy S. Binay.
Climate Change, Public Works.
PS Resolution number 868 commending the Integrity Initiative, a private sector-driven effort which aims to both institutionalize integrity standards among all sectors of society and fight the culture of corruption, and to urge the government to require all private firms engaging in business with it to sign the initiative's integrity pledge, which is a commitment to adhere to ethical business practices and to support a national campaign against corruption by Senator Gingona III.
Rules.
Communication. Letter from Manila Electric Company providing the Senate a copy of the 2013 Annual Report of Finances and Operations as prescribed by the Reportorial Requirement Section 15 of Republic Act 9209.
Public Services.
Committee reports. Committee report number 69 submitted jointly by the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development and Foreign Relations, and Senate number 21 introduced by Senator Ejercito Estrada, entitled an act instituting the Magna Carta of Filipino Seafarers, recommending its approval without amendment, taking into consideration Senate number 673, 1861 and 1986, sponsor Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Calendar for Ordinary Business.
Committee report number 70 submitted jointly by the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development and Games, Amusement, and Sports, and Senate number 129 introduced by Senator Ejercito Estrada, entitled an act amending Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines, by adding a new Article 287A reducing the retirement age of racehorse jockeys from 60 to 55, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Calendar for Ordinary Business.
Committee report number 71 submitted jointly by the Committees on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development, Local Government, and Finance on Senate number 1386, introduced by Senator Ejercito Estrada, entitled an act defining the role of the Department of Labor, Employment, and the local government units in the establishment and operation of the Public Employment Service Office, PESO, and the operation of Job Placement Office in SUCs and NGOs, amending for the purpose sections 3, 6, 7, and 9 of Republic Act number 8759, otherwise known as Public Employment Service Office Act of 1999, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Ejercito Estrada.
Calendar for Ordinary Business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension?
1 minute suspension.
Connectivity and cost and speed. That's the archipelagic nature of the I think it might, because the fiber optic cable is then microwave is less reliable.
Doon is landa. But
Could be.
wala kumbaga, what's the reason for Cebu to be slow and Luzon to be slow? But then, the
Island,
the smaller
at least
islands,
an island.
yeah.
Smaller island, yun, but something as big as Panay Island, Cebu, Luzon,
You can say,
and Mindanao is this small. I think that's right. Oo, nangimapaw talaga. Reliable and slow. They're so far away. They really need those good communication.
Nasaan na ba tayo?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, a few weeks ago marked the birth of the 100 millionth Filipino. The Philippines is now one of only 12 countries in the world with populations in excess of 100 million. Mr. President, allow me to pose a question. Is a rapid growing population a good thing for development? What I've always believed is that a population should be nurtured. A huge population on its own cannot be said to be an asset to the country if the people are not equipped with the tools they need, not only to get by and survive, but to thrive. I had the opportunity to study this in a bit more detail last December when I took a course entitled Transnational Security Cooperation at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. Part of our curriculum was on demographics and security by Dr. Alfred Ollers. In his presentation, he defined demography as the study of human population, which included population size and growth, structure and characteristics, location and movement, economic activities, and population needs. Using this definition, we ask ourselves, what kind of population do we have? It is big and young. Given that our crude birth rate is at a high of 24.62 births per thousand population, which is one of the highest birth rates in Asia. But what is the socio-economic level of our population? What is the education level? How many live in poverty? How many are employed? How do we reconcile this with our poverty rate at a high of 27.9%, our unemployment rate of 7%, and underemployment rate of 22.7%. We need to study our demographic security by identifying potential stresses, challenges, and conflicts arising from our own demographic challenges. These would include the Philippines' unique and collective needs, tensions, and compositions, as well as key stress factors. By doing so, we would be able to craft responses and policies that could serve the needs of our people now, as well as prepare us for the future. We would also be able to harness our potential as a nation and build on our young population. In 2013, there were 19.2 million youth in the Philippines. We need to invest in the growth and strength of our youth and address the opportunities and challenges of having a young population. This does not only mean unemployment, but also nurturing their hopes and dreams. Our K-12 student population of 20.67 million, which will only increase over the next 20 years, also needs to be highly invested on, as it sets us up to be an attractive recruitment destination in the near future. The national government spends only 2.5% of GDP on education, which is less than our ASEAN counterparts. We also spend the least per student compared to our ASEAN 6 neighbors. Since a big part of our population and our single biggest contributor to GNP are OFWs and their remittances, what can we do to make their lives better? Are we content that they are forced to leave in the country to get a job? Should we not have more opportunities here for them? And if they do choose to leave, are low-paying, unskilled jobs their target, or can we improve their lives by giving them better skills to qualify for jobs with higher pays? Mr. President, let us keep in mind that we cannot irresponsibly bank on a young and growing population without a master plan. On the macro level, the country's economic and finance managers make plans and provide a budget for the country's economic future. But so should we equip every couple and every parent to do the same for their family and future children. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pia. Majority Leader.
Sir President, I move that we refer the speech to the Committee on Health and Demography.
So referred.
Sir President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2055 under Committee Report number 12. This is the Forestry Profession Bill, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the consideration of the Senate bill is now in order.
Mr. President, the status of the measure is that we are in the period of individual amendments. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Sani Trillanes.
Senator Trillanes is recognized.
To propose amendments, I move that we recognize the Minority Leader, Senator Soto.
Senator Soto is recognized to propose amendments.
You need time, boss? Tuloy na? Oh. Sir President, may I have a minute suspension?
Session suspended. Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the distinguished gentleman yield to some amendments we would want to propose?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Let me start, Mr. President, with amendments that I would like to personally include, no? And then later on, I will 17 and 18. After the word 75%, include or insert a new sentence after the period. In case the passing rate is exceedingly low, comma, or less than 20% in words and numbers, comma, the board may, in its discretion, comma, lower the passing rate, period. So the section 16 will now read as follows. To pass the forester's licensure examination, a candidate must obtain a general or weighted average rating of 75%. In case the passing rate is exceedingly low or less than 20%, the board may, in its discretion, lower the passing rate. So move, Mr. President. If the gentleman will accept.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Mr. President, accepted now.
Is there any objection? There being none, the motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 11, line 2, after the word forestry, insert the words and any other. Then after the word policy, insert a comma, followed by the word resolution, and insert another comma, and between the words measure and issued, insert the words or directive. Thus, Mr. President, to facilitate, Section 21A shall now read as follows. Violations of any provision of this Act, its IRR, Code of Ethics, Code of Good Governance, Code of Technical Standards for the practice of forestry, and any other policy, resolution, measure, or directive issued by the Board or the Commission.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Still on page 11, line 13, before the word addiction, insert the word proven. And on line 14, after the word jurisdiction, change semicolon to a period and delete the conjunction or, then insert a new sentence. In case of drug or alcohol addiction, a finding to this effect of a medical or drug testing facility shall be sufficient. So, Mr. President, Section 21H shall now read as follows. Proven addiction to drug or alcohol impairing one's ability to practice the profession or declaration of unsound mind by a court of competent jurisdiction. In case of drug or alcohol addiction, a finding to this effect of a medical or drug testing facility shall be sufficient. This is to protect the profession, so practice may be limited to only those of sound mind and full possession of mental facilities. I hope the gentleman will accept, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there
Thank
any
you.
objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 15, line 14, after the word commission, insert the phrase or in the internet through the website of the board. This is to ensure that one's status as a professional forester is easily verifiable. If I may read the entire section, it will thus read. The board shall prepare and maintain a roster of the names, residence, or office address of all registered foresters, which shall be updated annually in cooperation with the APO, indicating there in the status of the certificate of registration, professional identification card, and the APO membership, whether valid, inactive due to death, or other reasons, delinquent, suspended, or revoked. This roster, or the said roster, shall be conspicuously posted within the premises of the Commission or in the internet through the website of the board, and the information therefrom made available to the public upon inquiry or request.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. We now move on to the other set of amendments, and I hope you don't mind. We have to go back to page 2. Minor amendments, Mr. President, at times editorial. On page 2, section 4, lines 9 to 11, delete subparagraphs B and C. The rest of the section shall be adjusted accordingly.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 3, section 5D, delete the misspelled word studies. Replace it with studies.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
On the same page, section 5E, line 19, delete the word non-government and replace it with non-government.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Still on page 5, section 10, F, line 20, after the word pardon me, Mr. President. Page 5, section 10, F, line 20, after the word pardon me, Mr. President. Natawa ako sa spelling eh. After the word syllabi, insert the phrase and table of specification. Page 5, section 10, line 20.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Page 6, section 10O, line 10, delete the misspelled word regulations and replace it, of course, with the word regulations.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
On page 6, section 10, after line 8, insert a new paragraph O, which shall read as follows. Section 10, powers of factions, letter O. Ensure quality forestry education by examining the prescribed facilities of universities or colleges offering Bachelor of Science in Forestry, seeking permission to open forestry courses, period. The authority to open or close colleges or universities offering BS Forestry shall be vested on the Commission on Higher Education upon the written recommendation of the Board, period, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
I move that we adjust the sections accordingly, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
On the same page, section 10, line 16, delete the misspelled word at least, line 1, after the word Julie, on graduate of Bachelor of Science in Forest Products Engineering or Bachelor of Science in Agroforestry.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
On page 12, section 23, line 10, delete the section title non-payment of the annual registration fees and replace it with the section title non-renewal of forester license.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, motion is carried.
Just two more, Mr. President. Page 15, lines 23 and 25. After section 31, insert a new section 32, which shall read as follows. Section 32, mandatory continuing education on forestry. Within 6 months, in words and numbers, from the passage of this act, the board shall issue the rules on mandatory continuing education for forestry practitioners, period. Failure to comply with said rules shall result in automatic suspension of registration until such time that the forestry practitioner is able to complete all the required education units. The continuing education curriculum, this could be another paragraph, Mr. President. The continuing education curriculum shall always include subjects on A, climate change mitigation and adaptation, B, in parentheses, disaster risk reduction and management, and C, in parentheses, internationally capital accounting under the United Nations System of Economic - Environmental Accounting, SEEA, in parentheses.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, rather, may I inquire from the minority leader if he meant adaptation and not adoption in subparagraph A, Mr. President?
Paragraph A, climate change mitigation and adaptation. What is the preference of the gentleman?
The minority leader mentioned adoption.
Adoption,
okay.
Adaptation. Adaptation, Mr. President.
Okay. Accepted, Mr. President.
Subject to style, Mr. President.
Motion is approved.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. President, on page 15, section 33, line 28, just delete the misspelled word, registralion, and replace it with registration.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Motion is approved.
That's all, Mr. President. We'd like to thank the gentleman for accepting the amendments.
Thank you, Minority Leader.
Likewise, Mr. President, I'd like to thank the minority leader for vastly improving the bill with his amendments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, to give the opportunity to other senators to study the bill and propose their amendments, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2055 under Committee Report number 12. Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, consideration of Senate Bill number 2055 under Committee Report number 12 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, I was informed that by the sponsors of the Senate Bill number 2282 under the Committee Report number 56, the Fair Competition Act, that some members will ask questions or will interpolate on Monday and Tuesday. And for period of interpolation on Senate Bill number 12 under Committee Report number 31, some members have asked for more time to read the committee report and interpolate. It's an announcement and a manifestation, Mr. President. On Monday, we will have another Senate-House leadership meeting together with the majority and minority members of both houses. And if our fellow senators have concerns or are pushing for some legislation, they are most welcome to manifest this to their respective colleagues, maybe the minority leader, Senator Soto, or to the Senate President, and then we will be reporting back to them. With that, Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday, September 1, 2014.
Is there any objection? There being none, the session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, September 1, 2014.